Shalom. So like Shalom, Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shah, Bahashem Rakal Dash, and of course double honor scribes, the apostles and elders, a great millstone. Alright, who through the Holy Spirit continue to teach us this truth. Alright, because time grows short. Alright. This is not my own decent camp, and let me pose a question first. How many of you out there think that what happened in Nazi Germany with Hitler and those so-called Jews, alright, those Edomites pretending to be us, that happened out of thin air? How many of you think that what transpired in Nazi Germany between the Nazis and the great pretenders, the Jewish, the big-nosed people, how many of you think that just out of thin air they just decided to do that? Alright. You all ever heard of the Nuremberg trials? Alright. Those trials that happened as a result of what happened in Nazi Germany. Alright. Well, guess what? They were not. Alright. Guess who set that example? Good old USA. That's right. Alright. This is from the History Channel. And I'm pretty sure they'll say this was, hate speech. It says how the Nazis were inspired by, guess what? Jim Crow. Alright, when you think about Jim Crow, who do you think about? That's right. You got it. Many others. It was not just the Nazis. Alright. Anyway, let's get started. It says, in 1935, Nazi Germany passed two radically discriminatory pieces of legislation. The Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. Together, these were known as the Nuremberg Laws, and they laid the legal groundwork for the persecution of Jewish people during the Holocaust and World War II. And this is something they continue to latch on to, but you got to remember, these are the same people that were responsible for funding what happened to us with the transatlantic slave trade, alright? With the Dutch, West, and East India Companies, alright? It says, when the Nazis set out to legally disenfranchise and discriminate against their Jewish citizens, they weren't just coming up with ideas out of thin air. They closely studied the laws of another country. According to James Q. Whitman, author of Hitler's American Model, that says it all right there, that country was the United States. And that's why I've often said this is a special kind of Edomite demon, alright? The Americans. And everybody's starting to see that now. It's like what we were going through and are going through isn't enough of an example. But see, that's the thing. Everybody profited, and still to this day profit off of our misery. So it was okay, it's just those people not realizing that all this linked up to biblical prophecy, not those pretenders over there. Alright? It says America in the early 20th century was the leading racist jurisdiction in the world. But what about before then? It just started in the 20th century? Again, everybody profited off of us. Well, then let's go straight to the scriptures. See, these span across time. It's not limited to ancient, and that's where a lot of people get tripped up. Because they say, oh, well, that happened in biblical times. We're still in biblical times. Alright? Let's see, this is, we're still in biblical times. Alright? This is 1 Maccabees chapter 2, all the way down to 10. And it says, what nation, in fact, Hold on. Let me start up. So people won't say, well, you're taking that out of context. No. This is verse 6, and it says, let's see what the title is. It says, in those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joab, from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. Alright, it's giving you the lineages there. It says Judas, who was called Maccabeus, alright, and when he saw the blasphemies, verse 6, that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, woe is me, wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people, and of the holy city to dwell there, when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, and the sanctuary into the hand of the strangers. Now, who was the enemy he was talking about? Alright, this at the time was talking about the Greeks, who are, and yeah, you so-called Edomites, you so-called white people, well, you not so-called, you are Edomites, you so-called, you call yourselves, you refer to yourselves as white. There's nobody white on this planet, there's nobody black. Alright, you always like to claim, well, civilization started with the Greeks. Really? What happened to those civilizations beforehand? Alright, so let's just address it for what it is. So let's go to let you know who you really are. Let's start at the first chapter. And this is explaining how no so-called white man ruled on such a level before this. This is the first. This is the beginning. Alright? This is 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 1. It says, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, and he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece. He's the first of his ilk, first of his stock. Alright, as an Edomite, a so-called white man, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. And pride, classic Edomite trait. And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries to him. Alright? So these people were, the tax thing. Alright? And if you're paying taxes, or as it says here, tributary, you're subservient to someone. Alright? 5. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called, that's another thing, because he was a faggot. Alright? Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. Alright? So Alexander reigned 12 years, and then died, and his servants bare rule, every one in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves, so did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. Why didn't it say that about anybody else before him? Alright? So we know the stories about Egypt, alright, Babylon, pre-Egypt, the Akkadians, the Sumerians, but it never said anything like this. Why is that? Alright? So, wow, you people in these four that put crowns on themselves, alright, you had Seleucus, you had Ptolemy, who ruled Egypt. That's when you started seeing the so-called white people, alright, in Egypt. And then you had Lysimachus and Cassandra, alright? Those are the four. So this is what this is talking about. Alright, this is when evils multiplied in the earth. And then you had some more Edomites after them called the Romans. Alright? And we are now in America, which is the revived Roman Empire. It's all prophecy. This is verse, let me skip on down. Let's make sure. Here it is. says, he said, woe is me, wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there, when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, Edom. This is talking about, alright, so-called Greeks, and the sanctuary into the hand of strangers. Her temple has become as a man without glory. Her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets. Her young men with the sword of the enemy. And here's the point. What nation hath not had a part in her kingdom and gotten her spoils? All her ornaments are taken away. Of a free woman she has become a bond slave. And that's what we've been, because we've had no resting place since, alright, this happened. Alright, nothing to call our own. But these Edomites, these pretenders, alright, they want to claim everything. Everything great is about them. Now, people do this and go along with it, some out of ignorance, and some it's malice with forethought, because they know what actually happened, but they play along, just as some of these other countries do. Alright, specifically in places where that so-called white people, being the Jews, don't fly. That's North Africa, the Vatican, and over there in the so-called Middle East. Alright, it says, America in the early 20th century was the leading racist jurisdiction in the world, says Whitman, who is a professor at Yale Law School. Nazi lawyers, as a result, were interested in, looking very closely at, and were ultimately influenced by American race law. In particular, Nazis admired the Jim Crow era laws that discriminated against so-called black Americans and segregated them from so-called white Americans. And they debated whether to introduce similar segregation in Germany. Yet they ultimately decided that it wouldn't go far enough. So they called themselves improving. Yet on that, it says, one of the most striking Nazi views was that Jim Crow was a suitable racist program in the United States because American blacks were already oppressed and poor. He says, but then in Germany, by contrast, where the Jews, so-called, as the Nazis imagined it, were rich and powerful, it was necessary to take more severe measures. Okay, that makes sense, because if you, this is what Hitler as a young man saw. That was the purpose of the book he wrote, Mein Kampf. Alright, he was talking about how they were in all these high positions, and you got to remember during let me get it right now, when we talk about the Weimar Republic, and which is representative by, whenever you think of American stock market crash in October 29, well, equally so you got to think of the Weimar Republic, where hyperinflation, as the example that we use, alright, it took him over so fast. But another thing that was going on with that was a hotbed of homosexuality. Yes, from the early 20s on up. And he wrote about these things, alright? And a lot of people, when they think of Hitler because of the propaganda by the big-nosed people over there, they automatically think, devil, but they don't go into it. And again, I'm not advocating for this devil, because ultimately you're going to find out he was a Rothschild himself when you go into his lineage. Alright, so let's keep going with this. It says, because of this, Nazis were more interested in how the U.S. had designated Native Americans, Filipinos, and other groups as non-citizens, even though they lived in the U.S. or its territories. Again, going back to what the atrocities these devils have committed on our people. Now, having said that, let's get some scriptures here. Alright, I've got to go get these two scriptures. Alright, this is Daniel, as soon as it loads, chapter 9, verse 12. It says, and he hath confirmed his words which he spake against us and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us a great evil. The nation of Edom. It goes to see Jeremiah 49th chapter. For under the whole heaven hath not been done as hath done upon Jerusalem. Deuteronomy 28 and 49. All right. So as it is written, well, that's enough on that. But this is why these scriptures are here. Let's go with another one. Because all this revolves around certain people. Alright? And it doesn't point, no matter how hard they try to point that way, it doesn't add up with those people that are currently over there. This is Zechariah. It says Jerusalem to be attacked. Now you got to remember now, Jerusalem is a people before it's a place. Alright? He made a land for the people, not the other way around. It says, Zechariah 12:2, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. Verse 3, and in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Why do you think the things that are happening now in the world are happening? Alright? Because the Most High is shortening his time as it goes into Matthew 24 and 22nd verse. Let's get that real quick, alright? Because truly, if the Most High doesn't come back, there will be no flesh saved. But let's read it verbatim. This is Matthew chapter 24. Alright? You see all these things happening with this devil. And you should, as an Israelite, alright, and let's just say, I don't understand at this point, well I do understand, but you as a so-called Negro, when you see these laws passed that try to put these homos in the same context, they equate their suffering with what your people went through, yet you just stand by and, you know, what good are you? You know, there's something to be said about that saying, a person that doesn't stand up for anything, that fall, you know, they'll fall for anything, alright? And if you're not willing to die for what you believe in, you're not fit to live. Alright? This is Matthew chapter 24, verse 22. It says, and except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Alright? And you can just, it's like, I know everybody says this. It's like, it just seems like yesterday we were like, well, we just rolled into 2020. Now we're in February of 2021. Alright, continuing on, it says, these models influence the citizenship portion of the Nuremberg laws, which stripped so-called Jewish Germans of their citizenship and classified them as nationals. Alright? And this is a copy of the Nuremberg laws. Alright? But a component of the Jim Crow era that Nazis did think they could translate into Germany were anti-miscegenation laws, which prohibited interracial marriages in 30 of 48 states. America had, by a wide margin, the harshest law of its kind, Whitman says. In particular, some of the state laws threatened severe criminal punishment for interracial marriage. One thing they did with the Mann Act with the boxer Jim Johnson, alright, where he crossed state lines with this Edomite woman, alright, they got him for that. So they're going to bend and scheme and do whatever they can to get Jake, alright. It says the idea of banning Jewish, and they call themselves Aryans, what they're not. Aryans are Elamites, alright. It says Aryan marriages presented the Nazis with a dilemma. How how would they tell who was Jewish and who was not? After all, race and ethnic categories are socially constructed. And interracial relationships produce offspring who don't fall neatly into one box because they go with this, you're mixed and you are what your father is. That's another knock against these Edomites, especially these so-called Jewish people, because they go with the and they do this on purpose so you can't trace the lineage. They say, well, it's through the woman. That makes no sense whatsoever. It's the man who has to see. When you go to the scriptures, all that begetting, what was that talking about? That was talking about the man getting it in. Alright? Men beget, women conceive. Women conceive seed. Alright? It says, again, the Nazis look to America. Alright? He says, connected with these anti-miscegenation laws was a great deal of American jurisprudence on how to classify who belonged to which race. Controversial one-drop rule stipulated that anyone with a black ancestry was legally black and could not marry a white person. Laws also defined what made a person Asian or Native American in order to prevent these groups from American whites. Notably, Virginia had a Pocahontas exception for prominent white families who claimed to be descended from Pocahontas. Look at that shit. And then not only with this, I might have to make another video on this, but we know that they schemed and what was called the Dawes Act, and then they had what called the Dawes Rolls, alright, where land was, through inheritance and all that from Native Americans. So they squeezed their little leprous red asses up in there, and then you got the term $5 Indian, alright? But the people who actually were related to these people, in order to keep us from gaining any type of inheritance, they started saying, well, if you look, my point is, a lot of Negroes, so-called, are not Negroes at all, and vice versa. When it comes to Gad and Reuben, alright? It says the Nuremberg Laws, too, came up with a system of determining who belonged to what group, allowing the Nazis to criminalize marriage and sex between Jewish and Aryan people. Rather than adopting a one-drop rule, the Nazis decreed that a Jewish person was anyone who had 3 or more Jewish grandparents. Wow. Which means, says Whitman, that American racial classification law was much harsher than anything the Nazis themselves were willing to introduce in Germany. How about that? How the fuck about that? See, you keep into this, and this truth, and you're going to find out more and more how, what's the word I want to use? This shit that you learn in American schools, alright, was just that. Alright, they tried to tone it down, alright, so much. And they did, along with, they had help with the Daughters of the Confederacy and things like that, but just in general, these demons, these devils, these so-called white people, they got a whole lot to pay for. Alright, and this is just the things like that are coming out that we're just finding out. There's no telling, But the more you think, they can't get much more wicked than what they've already. And there's more to come, alright, because now this devil is getting found out. So it's like his back is up against the wall. So, wow. When it said that the Nazis weren't willing to carry it that far, so now what can these fake Jews say? Oh, we had it so bad. We had it so... No. Don't even. Alright, it says, continuing on, it's wrapping up here. It says, it should come as no surprise then that the Nazis weren't uniformly condemned in the U.S. before the country entered the war. In the early 30s, American eugenicists welcomed Nazi ideas, and And who was one of those? Margaret Sanger. About racial purity and republished their propaganda. American aviator Charles Lindbergh accepted a swastika medal from the Nazi Party in '38. Once the U.S. entered the war, it took a decidedly anti-Nazi stance. But black American troops noticed the similarities between the two countries and confronted them head-on with a double V campaign. Its goal, victory abroad against the Axis powers and victory at home against Jim Crow. And on a personal note, back in it was around 1997 here in the district, I talked to an old Jake that had been in World War II, and he was like, you know what? They treated the German prisoners of war better than they treated us. Alright? When we had to ride in those trains, they would put us in like the cattle cars and have them, you know, riding like anybody else would. He could still say that he had some feelings about that, and rightfully so. But you can't tell Jake that you are the main enemy. We